Hey there, Squirrel Army. We're doing more deck upgrades for the new precon starter decks. This one is for Chaos Incarnate with our commander, Kurta Doomscourge. So this is a goading deck. We want to goad our opponents. We kind of maybe want to flicker Kurta. Maybe, I don't know. This could be an interesting deck. Oh, we could go another route. What have we got here to kind of work with? We've got Karavak. What else have we got? We don't really have any other real legends in this list. Oh, well, there we go. So we don't really have a whole lot to work with as far as sub-legends. So we might have to find ways to flicker Kurta to get that goading happening more often and whatnot, and more consistently. So those are sort of some things that I will consider when I'm looking at this list. But it's a pretty interesting list to go to our opponents and do all kinds of interesting stuff with this deck. But I will take this list away, come back, show you guys what I did, and yeah, hope you enjoy it. If you're enjoying the content here, you can join the Squirrel Army by subscribing. Alright guys, so here we are, having finished going through the deck, and I'm just checking that we've got 100 cards, which we do, how much money we came to in the end to change up this deck. Bit of money into this deck, a bit more than the other one, still fairly in budget, not a huge budget, but certainly we have changed it quite a bit. Now, we'll say again that the deck list will be in the comments, in the description there, pinned somewhere. It'll certainly be down there if you guys want to find what I've done to this deck and not have to listen through the waffle on and whatnot of the actual deck and whatnot. If you know what's sort of more going on, I suggest that for more experienced players who play these decks. And if you're a more competitive player, obviously you won't build the deck like this. This is just the way that I thought the deck is kind of going. It's probably not really going this way, though, especially since what I was kind of looking through the deck was actually doing more just like burn damage style stuff. But anyway, it is what it is. I decided to go down a direction and thought, well, that's the way we're going. So first, I will, before getting too far deep into it, I will just say the main thing that I changed with the lands, because I don't really want to discuss the lands, is just the number of basics that we had in here. And with the non-basics that we didn't have in here, I'm not going to discuss them for very much because they're all basically under the same, which falls under the same for most of these decks. They're all just bad tap lands. You can just do better by having just some basics in the deck. And if you've got any real money, you can, maybe splash out for some better duels or whatnot. But the one tap land that I did keep was Myriad Landscape. I'm not in love with it, but it is a ramp land, technically speaking, though most of the time I do cut it. But I won't, discuss too much of that stuff too much. But anyway, let's get along with what I cut out so we can get along with what we put in. Ambitions cost, nice card draw, but I don't like these one-off card draw effects, so I just yeeted it out. Archfiend of Depravity, from what I was thinking we're trying to goad people, so we don't really want to wreck our opponents' boards too much. Yes, we've got to keep our opponents under control to some degree, but this recurring death effect isn't what we want. We want our opponents to actually have stuff and actually do stuff for us with those creatures, so we don't want this. We don't want to lessen them to 1 or 2 creatures. Or whatnot. We want them to have heaps of creatures so that we can, make sure that they're doing what we want to be doing, mostly. Because even if we keep them to 2 creatures, someone might just I have a combo and I win. So we really need to keep them goaded or keep them off balance and not be able to do what they want to do. The Taunter, I like it as a little blocker, but mostly, if we're really goading people well, we don't really need it. So it really doesn't help us that much. There are a couple of other things that do help us, a little bit when we're not goading each opponents too well, or if we are goading opponents well, we can still utilize them in some other way. We could utilize this in some way, but I don't really think that that's what the deck was like intended to do from my perspective. Maybe it's not the right perspective, but I wanted to goad people, and that was what the deck was like my thought of doing. But anyway, the breath here, just 5 damage to each opponent, isn't really going to cut it for me. It's got to do more than just do some damage, so I just yeeted it out. Burnished Heart, I just find it's too much of an investment. 6 mana is a lot of mana to get 2 lands, and they enter tapped. So, yeah, it just takes a whole lot of effort to get not very much. So I just would rather keep it out of here and keep to more efficient sort of things. Gear Hulk, I think, again, this is more on the burn plan. Like, the problem here is that it's one-off. Like, we could put more stuff in here to flicker it, but then, we've got all this flicker stuff and maybe 1 or 2 targets for that flicker stuff, so I just didn't think it was worth our time to go down that avenue. It's an alright, 6/6 first strike body, but I think we can just do better than that and having this one-off ability. Dictate, I think this is one of the last cards that it took out. I thought we could take advantage of this card, having it had flash, and that meant that we could just be like, oh, okay, cool. Before we do damages or whatever, we double our damages, and then if we pretty much kill everyone, we don't really care about any of the backswing from it. But I just had to cut something, and I couldn't really figure out what else to cut, so this had to go. So it's a really decent card, especially if you can play around it and make sure, mathematically wise, I can kill everyone if I double my damage or whatever. But other than that, it's not really that useful because it does affect us as well. If it had just affected our opponents, it would be great, but yeah. The Maya, opponents sometimes are going to have creatures in their graveyards, sometimes not. So I don't really love spells like this. They do have to give us something of theirs if they have something, but if they've got nothing, well, we've just got a dead spell in our hand. We've got to wait till we can actually, get something off of it, and that could be a long time, so I'd rather just have more things that actually we can actively play and get ahead from and not have to worry about whether our opponents have, not got anything in their graveyards or whatever. The Riches, we get to draw an extra card, but again, I don't like that one-off card draw. And each opponent can draw a card, and then we just get to deal 5 damage to a random opponent. If it was 5 damage to each opponent, then it'd be a lot better, but even then, I just think 5 damage plus we get to draw a card and each of our opponents gets to draw a card isn't worth our time, so just yeeted it out. Feed the Swarm, I know this is controversial, but I don't like it. So I just took it out, and if you want to keep it in, but whatever, I'm not keeping it in because it's sorcery speed and I don't like it. Fiery Confluence, just too little. The amount of damage that it deals to creatures is too little. The amount of damage that it deals to opponents is pretty irrelevant. Destroying an artifact isn't too bad, but for 4 mana, only being able to destroy 3 artifacts isn't that amazing. There might be a couple artifacts out there that we might want to destroy with it. The nice thing about this is the flexibility, but honestly, the 1 and 2 damage modes aren't really that useful for the most part, so I just don't think that they're true modes. And so then you're just playing a bad destroy 3 artifacts sorcery, so I just don't think that's worth the time. Gutter Snipe, we're not that heavy on instant and sorceries in this deck. I don't even think we were that heavy on instant and sorceries when the deck was, before. Maybe it was a bit more, but certainly not that heavy as to think that it was a Spellslinger deck or that you should be relying on this thing to do very much. So I just took it out because it just didn't make any sense, and I didn't think that this is a deck that's Spellslinger, and I didn't think that we could change it into being a Spellslinger, so no. Mirage Mirror, whatever, the mirror cloning thing. We get to choose some of our creatures and clone them, but what if we have no creatures? Now, that's going to be a small task sometimes, but it does happen. So, and not that we have a million legendaries, but we do have a few legendaries, and if we just have legendaries on our field, which our commander obviously is like, maybe we want to clone our commander in a sense, because it'll goad people, but any other legendary that doesn't really have a good ETB or whatever, we don't really want to clone because we're just going to get really nothing out of it, so except death triggers and whatnot. So we're not really a death triggers deck, so just nah. Couldn't really force it. Karavak, he's a really good card, but he's more of the we're going to do damage to you via our stuff type build. Not the goad, let's have fun, let's see what happens type build that I thought this deck was. So certainly if you want to keep going down the Karavak route of just like, we're going to deal a whole bunch of damage to our opponents and we're going to kill our opponents with whole bunches of burn damage, I think that this belongs as the face of the deck, or maybe, in the 99 of a deck that's suited more for just like, we're going to burn you to death. We're going to, do all this stuff and you're going to die. Like there is a lot of that stuff here and a lot of that stuff I took out, but I just didn't think that that was what the deck was doing, but maybe I was wrong in thinking that, but that's just the way that I perceived it again. So Magnetic Force, same sort of thing. I just didn't think that this is the way the deck was going. And, 3 damage after you've played 8 mana for this thing just isn't that amazing. Like each upkeep, yeah, sure, that starts to stack up, but really at 8 mana we want to just have something that says we win the game, not, oh, we might win the game. Mana Geyser, I don't like these one-off rituals either. I know a lot of people really like this one. It's a real staple out there, but I don't like it. I know a lot of people will put it back in, though, or keep it in or whatever, so you're going to have a hard time, I think, trying to cut something else for a lot of the cards that I did put in, though. I will say that. Obnixilis, just too slow at doing really anything. 5 mana, +1 to draw a card and lose a life isn't amazing. 5 mana sorcery to destroy a creature isn't anything. It isn't anything at all. So, if you ever get to the ult, it's not terrible, but getting to that ult just takes way too long, I find. At turn 5, you could be just doing so many other things. Yes, it's card draw or whatever, but you can just get better card draw, we can get better ramp, we can get better removal, so I just don't think we need this. And we can get better win conditions, so Debasa, I like Debasa, but I don't think it's for what we're doing here. If we were just like, we're going to kill your creatures deck, or we're going to steal your creatures deck, or we've got a whole bunch of stuff that interacts with the graveyard deck or whatnot, that sort of thing, or make you discard or whatever, that sort of thing, then yes, I'd love this in here, or in a deck, but that's not what I thought, again, we're doing here, so I just decided we'll take it out. Read the Bones, don't like these small one-off cantrip effects, basically. Making of the pit, this thing, whatever it is, but making people sacrifice their creatures and getting a creature, where X is the total power of creatures sacrificed this way, isn't too bad, but it isn't that amazing. And we've got to sacrifice something as well. That's okay, but again, I just think we can just wrath our opponents and literally kill everything if everything's sort of going pear-shaped, so I don't think we need this. We just need things to be dead on our opponent's boards if we're, like, trying to remove their stuff. And again, we want our opponents to have stuff as much as possible. We don't want to hinder them that much. We want to only hinder them if we absolutely have to. And if we absolutely have to, then we want to get rid of everything. Or pretty much everything. Sangromancer, Whenever an opponent's creature dies, gain 3 life. Whenever opponent discards 3 card, oh well, yeah. No, it is both gain life. Whatever. We both gain life for them discarding cards or having their creatures die. Again, not that we're not ever killing their stuff, because of course we will kill their stuff here and there, but just not enough. Like if we were again a sacrifice deck or an aristocrats deck or something like that, or if we cared about the life gain, then maybe. I just don't think it does a whole lot for anything that we're doing. It's just sort of keeping us more alive, I guess. I don't know. The Spectre, it has to deal combat damage, which is, like, not impossible, but it is a 6 mana creature, and I know some people say, well, that's not that bad. I know I often would say that's not that bad either, but we've got so many better options, and really we just don't need this sort of thing. And again, why are we getting people to put things in their graveyard? That's not what we really want to do. We really don't want to hinder people. We want people to have stuff so that we can goad their stuff, so that we can, make our opponents do most of our work for us in killing our opponents. That's what we want. The Primordial, same as the Barca, just steal stuff from our opponents' graveyards. I don't love it, and I don't really think it's on theme for what I thought this deck was doing. It's a nice card, but again, at this 7-8 mana range, you really want your card to just actually say, well, you win the game, not we're going to steal some of your creatures and we don't know what's going to happen after that. Sign in Blood, don't like these small cantrips. Solemn, not a bad card, but I think we've got a whole lot better, so I think we can just cut it. Mind Shadow, again, we don't want to hinder our opponents too much. Getting them to sacrifice their biggest thing means we're getting rid of their thing that does the most damage to our other opponents, and it doesn't give us any other upside, so yeah. Cypher Mind, don't like these one-off cantrip effects for the most part, so yeah. Terminate, not bad, but I just thought we had a whole lot other stuff that was here that did a whole lot more, plus there's a whole lot more other cards that do a whole lot more better of an effect. So I just thought we can cut it, and regeneration isn't that important. Plus, we do want to exile our opponent's stuff if we can. It's much better being able to, eliminate certain creatures if we really need to. The Alchemist, again, we're not really Spellslinger, and we're not really trying to ping people. We're trying to goad people. Some of these things that are hitting our opponents are there for other effects or whatnot. So we could say it's here for other effects, but a lot of those other effects are on the card itself or a part of something else that we're trying to do, or, just inherent card advantage and whatnot. So those cards we need because, well, we don't have good card advantage and things like that in these colors. So yeah, but this doesn't offer any of those sorts of things, so just yeeted it out. The Hunter, again, this is more if we're a sacrificing deck or whatever, that type of deck. It can sacrifice things for us, but 2 mana to sacrifice things when we don't really want to sacrifice things isn't where we want to be. We want to keep our stuff as much as possible on board so that we can continue to goad people and we can continue our game plan and whatnot. We don't want to be doing this. Disintegration. This one's pretty meh. I think Terminate's a lot better. Yeah, it gets to do 3 damage to an opponent or whatever. That's pretty meh for the most part. Yeah, so I think it really doesn't add a whole lot to our game plan. The Nighthawk literally doesn't do anything. Doesn't have any relevant text, just has some keywords, and that's it. So not worth our time. Power Stone enters tapped. So that's where I draw the line with it. I just don't love it. I think Hedron Archive is better than this, because even though it's 4 mana, at least it enters untapped, and you can use it right away. So It's basically the same thing as this in that sense. It happens on turn 4 most of the time, or whatnot. Or you get to that mana on that fourth turn, relatively speaking. And it just has so many other upsides. And then Slovak's Tome or Saravak's Tome is just way better than that as well. So yeah, but anyway, that is that, and I will be moving on. I'm not going to discuss this verbatim for very long. I don't think there's much in the sorceries. I don't think there's anything in the sorceries, actually. I think there's only 2 things in the instance. So, Wild Magic Surge, just decent, really good removal, just destroys anything, and they, warp or Chaos Warp style into a permanent that shares a type with it. Sometimes they'll get something better, sometimes they'll get something worse, but we need to be able to destroy any permanent. So, and it doesn't give them the potential to get the same thing back like Chaos Warp does. But Chaos Warp is still pretty darn good because it can deal with anything. And Baleful Mastery just exiles a creature or planeswalker. At least it has a lot of flexibility in that as well. And it is 2 mana. Don't read the 4 mana part. Don't read that part. It's 2 mana. Let somebody else draw a card. It's not that big of a downside. You can start forming, deals with people and whatnot. Or you can even give it to the opponent that you just exiled something and say, hey, well, I'll give you something back. Right, what else? What did we put in the enchantments? We put in Shiny Impetus. We can put it on a creature and go to... Usually I don't like enchantments and auras and things like that because they don't stick around for very long and whatnot. But even if we get 1 or 2 triggers off of this, then it's worth it. We've gotten some treasures and whatnot, so that's been useful for us. That's what we need it for. We need it for the mana, and we need to go to our opponents. So it does those 2 things pretty well. Lightning Rig gives us a creature, or gives everyone a creature at the beginning of their combat, and it basically just can't attack us. So giving our opponent a thing to do extra damage to our opponents is something we do want to do. So this is a really good card for what we're trying to do. Force through damage, and we have a lot of triggers when our creatures attack or when our creatures deal combat damage to opponents and whatnot that trigger more goading, so that really will help us out as well. Even if they don't have anything, doesn't matter, we're giving them something to attack with. The Entertainer. So again, creatures we control have whenever a creature deals combat damage to a player, we go target creature that player controls. So we get to goad every single time we hit somebody, and we're going to be hitting people a lot when we have goaded them already because they're not going to have many blockers, so pretty useful. Marchisa's Decree is in here mainly because we become the Monarch. It does protect us a little bit, kind of. If people attack us, they have to lose a life, which can start to add up. But, we really want it for that Monarch. We don't really care about the rest. Like, the rest is just gravy. But we do need that card advantage and whatnot. And it does help us if people do find their way out of being goaded, whatnot, or if we have set up our goad stuff or whatnot. I'd rather set it up when we've got our goad stuff because then we can keep the Monarch for longer. But we do want to sometimes hand it around sometimes, kind of, so that people will be more incentive to hit each other, and then we can get it back and whatnot as well, so it's alright. The Rhetoric is here for the same sort of reason. If an opponent isn't goaded and actually gets to attack us, we get something of theirs. We don't really care about that much, but, that's fine. It is a deterrent to a degree. I'm not in love with it, but it is still pretty darn good, and it gives us some amount of card advantage, which we do need. And we can use those creatures to attack our opponents, even if we haven't got any synergy, or whatnot, or we can use them in other ways as fodder or as blockers or whatever. Aya, again, here for the Monarch. Same with Ambition, here for the Monarch. But it does some other stuff for us when we've got the Monarch. which is pretty useful. Deals a whole bunch of damage to stuff and things and stuff. So that's very useful, and we want that sort of effect. We'll go through the artifacts. I think we only added like 1 artifact, 2 artifacts. Mind Stone, Liquid Metal Torque, and I think Felwa Stone were the only adds. Oh no, Bloodthirsty Blade was the other one. Yeah. So the others are just mana rocks besides like Liquid Metal Torque, which can be helpful to turn something into an artifact, but beyond that, there's not really much here. And Mind Stone, which can be sacrificed to draw a card. Bloodthirsty Blade, we can equip to any creature that's on the battlefield during our turn and basically buff it and goad it. So I really like this because it sticks around a whole lot longer and we can keep giving it to different opponents and whatnot. Once per our turns, but still that's alright. The Agitator Ant does give people the choice to attack or well, not attack, but get the counters and attack. But still, like, sometimes we'll make those deals with people and eventually we're not always the biggest threat. So, like, again, or at least seemingly, so, and people will sometimes just take free benefits. Plus, we can take the free benefit ourselves, so we don't really need to worry if our opponents do take it. It's fine if they do take it. It's fine if they don't take it, because we can take it, and it's not core to our plan. It just helps with our plan sometimes, so it's fine. The Entertainer here, everything with power less than his is goaded. We can find maybe some ways to buff him up, so that might be good, but that's fine. He also makes treasures for us. He is a bit expensive on the curve there, but that's fine. It's still goading our opponents, so that's where we're at. The Quasit, I hope I said that correctly. Menace is pretty useful, especially when opponents maybe have only got 1 or 2 blockers, so that's pretty useful. And goaded creatures can't block, so even if our opponents have blockers, now their creatures that are goaded can't block, so that's useful again. And yeah, sure, as I was sort of saying, we don't have a million instant sorceries, but we do have a few non-creature spells, so that's a lot more of our deck. It includes our artifacts and enchantments and spells, so that's a lot more percentage of spells that are in our deck, so that can help us out goading more stuff. So overall, I think it's win-win-win, so I think it can fit in here. Death Kiss, though it is a sort of a one-off, with the monstrosity ability, that's okay. We don't really care that much. It's fine if it's a one-off, but it has a really decent ability anyway, even though it's a little bit expensive. That's still all right, and it does work for us as well, so it doubles our damage, so that really helps us out, and it only helps our opponents out if they're actually damaging our opponents, not us, so that's really useful. The Emberwild, here for the Monarch, more or less, for the most part, but also does hurt our opponents, again, if they're attacking us, so, preventing that damage is useful. The Saddle Brute, giving our opponents and us haste is pretty nice, so, yeah, that's well worth it, but only if they attack our opponents, so that's definitely worth it. Menace against our opponents with the Frontier Warmonger is pretty nice. Again, Menace is really nice, especially when people have only a couple of blockers sometimes, and whatnot, so pretty useful. When the Blood Fist of Keld, when a creature dies, if it was attacking, we draw a card, so if people do block our stuff and our stuff does die, then we get to draw a card. If it dies in another way while we're blocking, maybe we deal damage to our opponents, so that does help us out a bit sometimes, so, it does a whole lot more of stuff. The Geode Ranger, We get to goad each opponent's stuff. So again, that it is a bit expensive and it is determined on landfall. And by that time, we might be running out of lands, or we might be just flooding with lands. Who knows? But again, we can still find use in it. It is a 4/3 first striker, so that's all right. But still gives us some value. The Spy Master. Each end step, we give each of our opponents a 1/1 goblin, and it gives their creatures they control. They have to attack each combat if able. So that's pretty useful. Grenzo just goes people, or we can steal cards from our opponent's library. So that's pretty useful. Sometimes we've goaded each opponent so much that we need something else. So getting those extra cards is very useful. Again, sometimes it's not ideal because we would rather perhaps get our own stuff, but hey, we'll take any card advantage that we can kind of get. Grim Hireling makes us treasures. We can sacrifice the treasures to kill things, but that's not really why it's here. It's really here for the mana and whatnot, so that's fine. Karazakar is here for the card draw. It helps our opponents, but that's fine. And we can lose a lot of life to this, but that's still fine. The Kazul, again, protects us from opponents who can attack us at certain times, giving us 3/3 blockers. Sometimes that's not that amazing because people will attack us with flyers or whatever, but at least it does shut down ground flyers pretty well. The Battle Armor, again, this is another give people goading and whatnot, but we put it on our own stuff. We can't put it on our opponent's stuff, but when it hits a player, we goad each creature that player controls, so that's pretty useful. Buffs up our stuff or whatever, so that's useful. The Diversion are here. We can sack artifacts to goad a creature. So, like, we do make some treasures and some other things, and we do have some artifacts in our deck. So, again, we could start sacrificing those things to, again, goad people if we really need to. But there's the other part of this, which is kind of useful as well. So, tutoring for it isn't too bad. So, yeah, Life of the Party. We give each opponent a Life of the Party token. And, those tokens are goaded for the rest of the game, and then they punch our opponents pretty hard. So, really useful. Professional Facebreaker here for both the banner and the card advantage. So, really useful. Relic Robber, again, if it hits our opponents, we give them a 0/1, and it's a token with it can't block, and at the beginning of each upkeep, it deals the damage to each damage to that player. So really lowers our opponent's life totals pretty quickly if we get it through. That is the problem, but again, it's pretty useful when it does. So I thought we could keep this in here. That's pretty useful. The Hired Muscle, we could give it to our opponents, so that's really useful. It's very much like Xantia in that way. And quite good at doing a bunch of stuff, and really fits well with the idea of goading our opponent's stuff and whatnot. The Kobold attacks would goad each creature an opponent controls, so that's pretty useful on a 1-mana haster, even though it'll most likely be a one-off, but that's still alright, especially just for 1 mana. The Betrayer of Keldor gives our opponents survivors. They can't attack us with the survivors, and they can't block us with the survivors. And when she dies, we gain control of all of them, but that's alright. So our opponents get free things from us, which they can use against our other opponents, which, hey, that's what we want them to do. Vengeful Ancestor, ETBs or attacks, we go to an opponent, or a creature an opponent controls. Whenever a goaded creature attacks, deals damage to its controller. So, again, pinging them. And I think that was it. I think Xantia was already in the deck. So, yeah, that's the list here. Hope you guys enjoyed this one, and yeah, you can let me know what you think down there in the comments below, and hope to see you again in the next one.